part two. This is a little more practical side. Amelia,
yeah. Can you hear me okay? I'm out and about now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm originally from Oshkosh, but the family I'm trying to work in the conference lives in Kansas City.
Oh, right.
So on a world map, those two look real close together.
And driving wise, it's not.
Yeah, well, 5 hours. I was like, I could do that. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I've done some long hauls.
Yes. Wisconsin, as they say. You betcha.
That's how we say it. That's how we say it.
I bet you're the only one in Kyoto right now with that accent, you know.
Well, yeah, exactly. But yeah, I'm real interested in that chat GPT, which came up again today and every day of my life, because I teach language learning here. So it's a game changer.
Well, Belle Lee, who's applying to our doctoral program, and I are doing some studies of that. And I could ask Belle to do a presentation either this semester or next year when I teach emerging learning technologies. I can maybe have her come in briefly to talk about chat GPT. That'd be good. That's a good suggestion. We don't have anyone in the final couple of weeks in here, and we might make some progress by then. So maybe in week 14 or something, I could bring Belle in to talk about chat GPT.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I do have a lot of catching up because I did join those webinars that you had. I didn't join them live. I have to watch them. The ones through the Indiana University Center for Innovation.
Right. So I've sent those out today to everybody. There are webinars we're running on different technologies. So, you know, they're all free with an IU email account, and some of them are free to anybody in the world. They can sign up. So your brothers or sisters or they're not marked for which ones are global and which ones are Indiana only. The presenters get to decide, and so they should be flagged that way. But let's just say I was scrambling trying to get the list just done and make it all nice. I didn't have time to figure out which ones are global and which ones are only Indiana University. I say only Indiana University. Indiana University campus is like over 100,000 students, right? And thousands of faculty. It's big, you know. So Amelia, I'm going to mute you, or you're going to have to mute yourself. Thank you, Amelia. Whoop. Okay. So I didn't start. Did I start the recording? Oh, I did start the recording. Look at that. So week 3, part 2, we're getting more practical models on instructional design. And, you know, by all means, jump in. Maybe we could create a Jamboard, Christian, 2-part. One Jamboard for which model are you finding that you resonate with? If you've done the readings already, you could put, you know, which one which article you liked, or which model, which instructional design process you think is valuable. And the second Jamboard can be questions for me, or maybe we just, well, let's make them one big Jamboard, questions and models. Then we don't have to jump between boards. There probably won't be a lot of people jumping in. So let's make it one big board. And if we fill it up, we'll start board number 2, you know. So let's fill up board number 1 with which models, and there are various models that are out there. I normally would start with that, but I'm not going to start with that. Instead, oftentimes I get Rachel Kubrick, who's my doctoral student, my EDD, or she's my master's student. I'm twisting her arm to become a doctoral student. Rachel was working for 2U. 2U is an organization that does outsourcing of instructional design for universities and companies and so forth. And they build programs. They build certificate programs, master's programs, undergraduate degree completion programs for Harvard and for many other universities. And then they charge a huge amount of money and get royalties for that. 2U also has bought MIT's MOOC platform, EDX. So 2U has bought that. And since buying it, their stock has plummeted. And Rachel has left the company. So there are a couple of reasons I didn't bring Rachel here to go through the model of 2U. She no longer works at 2U, and I don't like bringing people in 3 semesters in a row because I feel that's using someone too much. So I've tried to memorize her slides, and I'm going to present them for you just to start. Now I'll go to my slides after, just to give you a sense of what people are really doing in the real world in terms of instructional design. I think her slides basically are a lot better than mine. And so I'm stealing them temporarily just to share with you, again, something's more current, because a lot of instructional design history is reflected in my slides. which I feel history is important. We should all know it because we can build on such history. But again, I'm going to work backwards, if that's okay with all of you. So, so that's the preface of this. And so let me see if I can call them. You see this learning experience design framework, Christian?
Yeah, I do. It's kind of a little bit small.
It's a little
So
bigger
maybe
now.
a few.
Yeah. So I'm not.
Yeah.
I can make this a little bit bigger. I can make a lot bigger. But and there it goes to 50%. I could go to 75%. Now it is a little bit bigger, right, Christian?
Yeah.
There's a lot of this is a report. I don't want to go through the whole pages of the report. I put this and Rachel's slides in guest slides in Dropbox for week 3. So we have Soon May's from week 1 and Ling's from week 2 from last week. And we have these from Rachel now in week 3 if you go to Dropbox. I could also send them as an email. It's not a big file. So this is the 2U framework, which they back up their framework with learning theory, with a book called How People Learn. How do people learn? Well, they figure out how people learn, they create a framework. If you took my R622 class last fall, or you took 546 in the past on instructional strategies, you know I've developed 2 or 3 or 4 frameworks, one called R2D2, read, reflect, display, and do, another one called Tech Variety for motivation online. They have their framework on feeling, intrinsic motivation, and intrinsic goal setting, and then doing, practicing, deliberate practice, and all that. Then thinking, metacognition, reflecting on what one has accomplished, what one is not been successful in terms of learning. So it's a think, do, feel kind of framework, I guess, if you will. And so if you get the article, you can read about the backgrounds of their framework, and it explains a lot of good theory. We had Richard Mayer quoted in here. Richard Mayer was a guest in this class 2 years ago. It was maybe the best guest I've ever had. And he's the most famous educational psychologist in the world. He's the most published anyhow. If you look at his Google Scholar score, it just blows me away. He's at Cal State Santa Barbara, or not, UC Santa Barbara, University of California, Santa Barbara. I don't know if he has a surfboard, but most people in UC Santa Barbara have most students have a surfboard. But you know, he can tell us a lot about dual coding theory, learning things visually and verbally. And you know, the multiple processes that we go through. We have 2 tracks, 2 memory tracks, a verbal track and an imaginal track or a figurative track to help us retrieve information stores when we need them to problem solve. We need to organize, integrate, and select among the knowledge that's out there. So if you can read this report, it walks through different instructional psychologists. I call Richard Mayer an instructional psychologist or a cognitive psychologist who's interested in psychology of instruction. And so they'll walk through this, all these different people in the field to talk about the doing, thinking, and feeling aspects of the model. And explains cognitive load theory. You don't want to give people too many things at one point in time so as to overwhelm them and they can't focus on any one thing in particular. And so Mika has her colleagues saying they're multitasking, or young people that she might be interviewing for a job. They're really not multitasking. You know, no one can do 2 things at once. They're just allocating their short memory bursts to different tasks and activities in a shorter amount of time. So it makes it look like they're multitasking, you know, in terms of being able to do 2 things at once. They'll be able to do 2 things within 5 minutes, but not at once, because they're going back and forth within the different tasks that they're asked to do. And they talk about the importance of building on prior knowledge, which we'll get to in week 6 or 7. I'll get into cognitive theory. I'll get into behavioral theory. If you read this piece, this is really about the underlying of all the psychology of learning that I'll be talking about in the next few weeks in here. Now, I realize full force that many of you have had courses in psychology as high school students, as college students, as graduate students. You've learned about behavioral theory, cognitive theory, social learning theory, constructivist theory, and whatnot, but not everybody has. And so there might be times when I'm going through behavioral approaches to, you know, giving feedback that you might zone out or don't attend. I've recorded all these sessions too. And so you can just watch them. They're available as what we call flipping the classroom, if you will. We could try a flipping the classroom experience in here and have you watch them and have ask me questions afterwards. Maybe we should try that one week, in fact, because I have created what I call an 8-pack of 8 different videos I've done more than a decade ago, and they're still relevant today. And so they go through metacognition and why it's important and the cognitive strategies for organization and rehearsal and retrieval and all that. There's all in there. And then they get into synchronous and asynchronous forms of learning, asynchronous coursework, which gets us into the technology side of learning. So this article sets us up in the human side, understanding cognitive information processing, if you will, and then moves us into a digital learning environment for where such terms, principles, and concepts are enacted within the 2U model, if you will. And then they summarize what that model has, and then they provide more expand. That's a brief, that's like an executive summary. Then they get into the framework itself and what how to engage learners and tap into one's emotional repertoire or one's emotional side, I guess, and how to foster intrinsic forms of motivation, how to foster volition and passion and seeking new information and so forth through online role play, through online discovery, through inquiry-based forms of learning, through problem-based forms of learning and so forth. And so you can read about that through stories, through narratives, through humor, through authentic practice, and how we want to build competence within an area so that we approach new tasks on our own. So we want approach motivation, we want sense of competence and confidence and self-efficacy, but we also want a sense of relatedness to other people that are learning along with us in that particular environment, and the autonomy to control things, as Cheryl said. We need flexibility and student decision-making and choice. We need to focus on the learner more than we focus on the instructor and the instructors. We should focus on the learner first, and that's the 3-part theory of Richard DC, Edward DC and Richard Ryan. DC and Ryan have tons of research at the University of Rochester on intrinsic motivation and self-determination theory and so forth. The triarchic aspect, the competence, relatedness, and autonomy, is alive and well in many books that you might read on motivation. And I'm thinking in particular Daniel Pink's book called Drive, if you've read that. And then we get into Paul Pinterest. Pinterest wrote a kind of a survey questionnaire that tapped into aspects of self-regulated learning. How can we measure whether students are self-regulated in their environment or will self-regulate in their environments? And so he developed a set of questions and how one can overcome challenges and difficulties through their strategies, organizing information, and highlighting or planning or monitoring, self-monitoring, evaluation, and so forth. What that might look for, what that might look like. So metacognition is being able to call up in particular instructional strategies when you need them. Metacognition is also reflecting on one's thinking. It's also reflecting on what one knows or what one needs to know. And we all have learning goals that we have. Well, we want to help students create our higher order thinking related goals. We want to have them be more engaged in that learning process so that they can move towards their particular plans and goals and so forth. Behaviorists who believe in more short-term sequence goals. Cognitivists who believe more in the long-term, more substantive kinds of goals, if you will. And Carol Dweck, which many of you heard her book on, mindsets and having a growth mindset being the most important, the belief that you can change your intelligence, to change your abilities, that through effort, through time, through consistent practice, through choice, through autonomy, you can build your intellect. You're not stuck with any particular level of intelligence. And that's more positive psychology, which is something that's become very highlighted at Stanford, where she is, and at the University of Pennsylvania, where they have a number of faculty who focus on grit, determination, perseverance, and growth mindset. And they're trying to teach this to teachers in schools and trying to emphasize that growth mindset providing opportunities for students to make improvements over time, to emphasize student effort instead of correct answers, to emphasize that failure is a part of all learning process, and to learn from those particular failures and so forth. To expose students to examples so that they can see that they can accomplish something. They might hear a story from someone else. They might watch a video and see that they have the capabilities of doing that. They might have a case study or a scenario and so forth. So that's all in there. Then they get in this article, they get in the doing side of things. And so what are some things that you can provide as an instructional designer or an instructional technology specialist in the online or blended or other types of courses, so students can try it out? How can we get them into an authentic kind of environment where they have to use the strategies that they've just used? They have to use the content that they've just gone through, or learn on just in time, on the fly, and try it out, if you will. So this is all, and then they get into cognitive load theory, as I mentioned. This is a little bit controversial when you get into cognitive load. Some people don't necessarily agree with everything about what the cognitive load people say. In particular, there's a person named John Sweller and others that state that learners process and retain information better when it's presented in a way that doesn't unnecessarily tax working memory. It's worth recalling that cognitive load can be intrinsic, extraneous, or germane. These three may exist in any learning event, they say. And so you can read about cognitive load theory and how to foster more success among your learners with different instructional approaches, so as to challenge them, to move them to the edge of their envelope, to move them to the edge of the possibilities, yet not to overwhelm them, if you will. These articles, I don't think, is in the packet of articles assigned with it, and that's why I'm going through this with you a little bit today. But I did put them in Dropbox. Again, go to Dropbox, go to guest slides or guest articles. So then we had the complexity and challenge. That's Neil Vygotsky. And my dissertation is based on Vygotsky, which means trying to move people to the edge of what they're capable of doing through nudges, through prompts, through suggestions, through hints, through gradual transfer of expertise, so that the student, the learner, sees that they can accomplish something they previously couldn't have, that might have been beyond their ZPD, their zones of proximal development, but through helps, through supports, through scaffolded learning, through some instructional scaffolds that you set up in their environment, through some job aids, some study guides and whatnot, that the learner gradually internalizes the strategies that they might see on a social plane, those scaffolds that exist there in your discussion forums, in your examples, videos, in the flipped classroom, in those tutorials, in the tutorial elements that you might be building in to a course, including the audiobooks or the ebooks and documents. So if you present a complex idea, you give students an overview of where you're headed within that idea. Have them have a sense of direction and where you might be going. Now, you don't always want to give that students a sense of direction, because if you're doing everything for the students, they'll sit back and wait for that, for God to appear and provide the resources for them. You want to have a kind of a 50-50, where some of the time you want to have students explore on their own and then reflect on what they learned. Some of the time you want to do direct instruction, like what I'm doing now, somewhat semi-direct actually, and so forth. And then we want to think about the modalities that students have strengths within, that they might think they learn best with, but not only present things that might be verbal in nature, because some students are highly verbal or visual or hands-on or reflective, but have all that, those activities, those experiences, those tasks be throughout the curriculum, throughout the course, throughout the modules, so that students can see videos of patients that they're learning to become a nurse, or simulated patients, or having animations and so forth, to learn new concepts and new situations, and to see relevant scenarios, relevant examples where they can get the prior knowledge. If you have students solving different cases in an authentic forum, they can internalize that and then seek to answer more difficult problems and so forth. Then they get into Richard Mayer's 12 principles of multimedia theory, which are extremely valuable. I highly recommend reading page 24 and 25 to read more about Richard Mayer, and then practice in a context. More learning's all contextual in nature. Learning's all embedded in a social cultural context for our learners on a more of an authentic learning, a high fidelity learning plane, if you will. So this is in there too. And then they get into repetition and interconnectedness of the learning and interweaving different contents together and having spaced practice over time. And then deliberate practice tests with reflection questions, with just suppose questions, or other kinds of practice exams or practice cases or practice scenarios and stories and examples. This is all in there. I think I might skip to the end here. They talk about formative and summative feedback and metacognition, but they have one thing important in this article, a huge reference list. If you want to know more about intrinsic motivation, or if you want to know more about self-regulated learning, or more about use of prior knowledge, David Ausubel's work in prior knowledge theory, which I'll get to in a couple weeks. If you want to know more about challenging students and complexity of learning and authentic learning, that's all. They have different sections set up here, using stories, using social-based forms of learning, metacognition, all that kind of stuff. That's all in that particular article. So that's a precursor to going to the slides of Rachel. Rachel sent that to me last year when she presented in here. Christian, thanks for the Dropbox link. Do we have any comments in Jamboard yet? So does anyone want to make a comment on that particular report, or what I've said, or a question?
Just a comment. It's very informative. Thank you for sharing.
It is really informative. You know, I've been doing research in this field for decades, you know, and there are a lot of short reports like this, but this one, it's nice because it crosses over between psychology of learning and psychology of instruction. It's really instructional psychology, which I think is where we all should be at. I don't know, the field of IST, the field of ed psych, really it should be looked at as one, you know, and to think about both the learner and the designer of that instruction, both simultaneously. We shouldn't be breaking it apart. We should be, you know, thinking about both when you're learning within this field. As you're a EDD student, right, Mika?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So, and again, your advisor is?
So no, I smiled because you remember I have to change. So I'm
Okay.
still waiting. Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so that's right. So there's this particular report is it's a good one. It's a good one to start with, you know, and it's not that complicated, but yet it provides that some base knowledge. It really does a nice job of that. Well, let me go to Rachel's slide. I won't go through her slides that much, but again, they're available in that place that I just showed you in Dropbox, or that Christian put up there. And now I'm trying to find, there we go. And
Sorry, Christian, I saw that you smiled when I said I had to change. No, it's all positive, all positives.
only positives. So in her slides, these were her slides from last year. And again, I'm just gonna see if this will let me, okay. So to you, we power world-class online higher education beyond traditional. Okay, no back row thinking. So this is the org chart, and you can see that they're heavy in learning and design, and they should be. That's the name of the company, right? In creating courses and boot camps and video production and so forth. They have both asynchronous and synchronous elements to the courses that they design. And they use the synchronous for conversation and for reflecting on what one might have learned in an asynchronous format to deepen the learning. They might use the synchronous to do some teamwork, to do some collaborative work, to deepen the learning and so forth. The async to reflect on what you just did, what the activity that happened and so forth, the sequences of the activity. So this is their delivery model, their weekly delivery model within the teams that they're working on. And whoop. I'm trying to scroll up, and this, okay, so it only, only lets me go one page at a time. And this is a full page. So I'm trying to get as much on a screen. So I might have to go a little smaller here, Christian, if that's okay, to try and get the whole. No, I guess it doesn't show any more than that. All right, so I'll go back up to.
You also might try that little arrow to the right of the display, that it will hide that side panel and give you a little more space. In the
Oh, like
center. Yeah,
a little
just
arrow.
down. Yeah. So there's the side panel halfway through the screen.
Yeah.
In the area that it's a caret or a triangle that points to the right side of your screen. Do that.
Points to the right side of my screen. Oh, I'm sure it's there somewhere.
It's okay.
So they're working backwards in their model. They move from the learning objectives, and then they think about, how to design the particular instruction for those particular objectives. What kind of prior knowledge might students have to collect that, to set of metacognitive reflection questions that might happen on the front end as well as on the back end of that learning experience. And then they review the concepts that they're about to learn, they create the setting and so forth. So this is kind of their model, if you will, for the design of the instruction. So they move from, the course development, from strategizing and thinking about the sequencing of the content, then developing particular curriculum materials, assembling the team to design those materials, and then having the course go live, and then monitoring what's happened within that particular course or experience. Let's keep going here. And so it's the same thing in that slide. And again, the feel, do, think model, focus on attitudes, focus on the metacognition, but also focus on hands-on doing. Try to take into account where the learner is coming from and what their goals are in terms of thinking, skills that you want to impart, or, and then to impact on them. So the feeling side gets more at the motivation, the intrinsic motivation, the goals, the self-regulated learning opportunities. The doing side gets at, challenging students with a set of practice activities, scenarios, cases, or quizzes, and having some deliberate practice and some reflections on the stories that the learners are being told. And then the thinking is providing feedback on their performance, as well as socializing with other students in maybe social media or some other intra-psychological plane in and amongst other learners in that setting. So they have strategized the course strategies to develop the learning objectives, and then work backwards from the objectives to create the content. So this is a backwards backwards learning design, which Si-Hung talked about last week, a backwards design approach to instructional design, if you will. Then their design methodology not only includes backwards design and the creation of content, but also lets students charge ahead by having some student inquiry-based kinds of learning and letting students do project-based kinds of learning. They also talk about creating visualizations for different activities so that students can learn both visually and verbally, if you will. And again, my clicker's not working quite perfect here. So the backwards design model, what do we want them to do? We ask them in the front end. And then how are we going to measure what they've done? We determine the practice, and we assign some strategies, and then we determine the effectiveness of those strategies. We design different learning experiences based on the students' knowledge base that they have, the prior knowledge that they might have. And then we select the instructional tools, the digital tools that we might use to best equip our learners with what we want to have happen on that psychosocial learning plane. And then we create a course map, a concept map, a timeline, and some other thing that we might have within the course. Then they talk about clarifying the objectives and the purpose for the learning. What do we want to have happen, and what are the objectives for that experience? And then priming. Priming means basically having some activities on the front end before we teach that gets students ready to learn. It could be a short case scenario, or it could be a multiple choice quiz, or it could be just giving them a motto or a saying, or just a quote, if you will, to prime their different knowledge that you want to have them use. Maybe it's a famous quote that you're using from someone in history to prime their knowledge base. And then we want to find out what students know and build on that. We want to build on their prior knowledge because we cannot ever learn anything unless we have a scaffold to build upon. We have to have a schema to build upon. We have to start somewhere with our learning base. And then once we have learned sufficiently, we practice. So this is basic. And then post-processing is important. Within their model and my model, we want to not just complete the tasks that are set up, but we want to reflect on the learning process as a whole. If you took 622 with me, we had a super summary that was due last semester. The super summary is basically post-processing on what one's learning. And in some ways, it's the super summary that's the most important thing that you did last semester, something that you can take with you and to reflect again 5 years from now, 5 months from now on what it was that you were learning. So post-processing happens when we read, when we write, when we do math, when we do any kind of instructional activity. I was a writing researcher, so I developed the kind of the reprocessing model of writing to get us to think about writing as a recursive nature, not just writing the first thing that comes down and plopping it down, sending in the paper, but to go back through and think about the integratedness of our learning that's happening over time. And so basically, they're within this picture here, they're going through their particular model. They talk about how do we motivate our learners within this model, what kinds of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are we setting up, as well as how do we diagnose what they know and what they don't know, the errors, patterns that they might have, and then providing didactic, traditional lecture-based forms of instruction or other kinds of instruction, demonstration and modeling, peer feedback, group work, other kinds so that one can learn and then practice those different learning skills. And I think, and then having not just instruction from all-knowing expert, but have the opportunities for students to socialize with their peers and review the concepts they learned and get feedback from those peers that will help them build stronger, more interconnected, more rich knowledge bases because they've learned them from more same age peers or people who might be closer to you within your zones of proximal development. That will happen in the social networks that we have in Facebook, in WeChat, in Line, in Kakao Talk, in Instagram, in what other technologies that we have, Twitter and TikTok, and there's more. I forget what's used in the Middle East. Anyone from the Middle East? There's another one I haven't mentioned that has a stupid, when the people put their phones on, you hear this stupid noise. I forget what. It's used a lot in Saudi Arabia, I know that. Anyhow, and we want to foster, some bigger order, higher order kinds of things through concept maps and timelines, and elaborating on what we know by teaching someone else what we've just learned, by having students do big metacognitive reflection on the overarching kinds of things that we have learned within that task or that structure and so forth. So this is kind of that 2U model. I just pulled out the 2U model instead of bringing Rachel back. I didn't go through everything. That's Rachel's model that she was using. She's no longer at 2U. But I found that's more current than the models I'm going to show you during the next 15 minutes. But does someone want to comment on the 2U model? Have you seen it before? Have you heard of it? Does anyone know of 2U? I'm just curious if anyone has. Do we have any questions in the Jamboard, Christian? I don't see any.
We have one.
We have one. Whoever has the question in the Jamboard, you want to go ahead and.
Yeah, I feel like this sounded familiar, and I'm wondering if last year when I was looking at coding boot camps and things like that, I'm wondering if that's where I encountered that 2U.
Oh yeah, they're big on coding boot camps.
Yeah, because I was going to universities that I'd heard of and then getting identical descriptions of the courses, and it was in the fine print, I think. But my question in the Jamboard was about, I guess, so it sounds like they design the curriculum, and I assume they need subject matter experts, and then do they recruit the instructors later, or is this more like a MOOC? I guess that's what I was trying to type into the Jamboard.
Do they recruit subject matter experts?
No, so like I'm thinking, well, my guess is that they would need a subject matter expert to help design the course.
Yeah,
But then
yeah.
who actually does the teaching? Do they recruit instructors
Oh,
later?
no, I don't think they do so I think the university is in charge of the instructor side,
Mhm.
but that can always be farmed out. But see, the university controls something there, I believe. It's the 2U will design the courses, and then you can get your suite of different instructors if it becomes a big enough course, you know, that you need to get multiple people to teach it. What's that, Matt?
I was just going to say that org chart that we saw earlier that kind of
Yeah.
broke it out. It looks like it's a pretty robust operation in terms of the planning and the analysis and the designer part of it versus all of the production. I think it said video.
Yeah, video
So they
production
probably
and all
have
that.
a lot of specialists in each of the areas that I would think.
Yep.
At this kind of scale, which would be pretty nice to have if you're trying to go for something like this.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I've
kind of-
had a production team when I've given speeches sometimes. I went to Copenhagen once. I had a crew. I had a sound person, a video production person, a stage manager, all these people. I was in a 2-tiered stadium though when I was, so I was in like the, one of these gigantic places. So this is doing stuff that's, very expensive. So they're going to need to have a lot of experts. And, they charge an arm and a leg. This is not, they don't get 5% on this. They get like 50% of the course, they get a huge amount. I don't know exactly, 50% might be 60%, might be 40%. It's a huge amount that they're getting here, so they can afford to get that. I just find it unbelievable that a university would give away 50% of their tuition income to an entity in the corporate space. It's just kind of bizarre, but it's outsourcing. Mika.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I remember when Rachel and I spoke, because we worked in a group when I first started the program. I know
Right.
that she worked with 2 of my old professors from when I was doing my master's at NYU, and she worked directly with them I believe it was for the online master's program. So the professors were the subject matter experts, and they worked on making sure that again, I'm not the expert. I don't remember everything we talked about, but I know that she worked directly with those professors to make sure that their classes were, or the activities were suitable for online courses.
Who are the professors? Because in my other class, we're bringing an NYU person, Alyssa Wise, who's an alum of this. She got her master's in IST or doctorate in learning science here. Who are the 2? Was it Dr. Ploss maybe? Or
No, since my master's was in communication sciences and
Oh.
disorders, and so different departments, Cecilia
Okay.
Stewart and some others.
Okay. To be able to go to NYU and just hang out there. I'm sure you didn't just hang out there, but to go and hang out in the cafes and all that, it would be just you did an online one, right?
No, in person.
In person. So you
Yeah.
did hang out in Greenwich Village. Okay.
Yeah, so I used my first online degree.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, we should have all visited you there. If you ever go back, you can invite all of us to come to cafes. Any other comments on 2U?
I guess my question was, I posed it thinking of it from the teacher's point of view. So the advantage of partnering that way is that you get the higher production value, I guess, but then if you're not the instructor who designed the course, not a lot of freedom. And so is there any attraction in I guess it makes it easier if everything's laid out for you, but less creative freedom, I guess.
And less personal investment in the course. How do you feel the connectedness, the desire to make it the best possible when you're really not going to be the one teaching in the end? And it's not you still be accountable for it, but it's not the same as at least I'm biased. I've been teaching for a long time. I want every last kernel that I can find. That's, I created the monster syllabus, as you may have heard of, a 100-page syllabus. And it's all guided. It's all whatever you want, whatever you want to do. And I also wonder, as eclectic as that sounds, once you design a process or a model, that becomes your process or model. You can't change from it. Whereas an instructor like me or like one of you could decide next semester to just teach it a different way. And I once walked into a class and said, I'm going to teach this course in reverse. You know, I walked into one class. I didn't introduce myself. I told you last week or 2 weeks. I forgot to introduce myself the first week. So I decided the very last thing in week 15, I'll introduce myself. I'll make it very student-oriented class, you know, or learner-centered. It's not about me. It's about what they're going to learn. You know, once you design a course like this, you're stuck with that course design, right? And you've paid a lot of money for that course design, so it better be good.
So how do you feel about the courses you've created that now you can't teach?
Can't teach because I'm not smart enough. I'm not a learning scientist anymore. I was trained in learning science. I don't go to their conferences, therefore I don't speak their language. How do I feel about that? That's, you got 3 beers at Lenny's, I'll tell you my true feelings.
I wonder because I mean these people creating, say us as instructional designers might be creating this content that somebody else is going to be delivering, and maybe we aren't even qualified to deliver it.
I'm gonna hit you. I'll give you one of these flashing lights. We'll play, you know, okay. So I'm gonna go to part 2 here, just my slides, which I normally present, but you know, to be honest, instructional design, once you've seen one model, you've seen most of them. You're not seeing them all. You know, there are little variations of each one. We have articles to read this week. I'll pull out a couple of things from what Robert Branch has to say and what others for this week, Gary Morrison and others have to say for this week. So you'll see the people. I have pictures of the folks. So you're going to read articles. You'll at least see what they look like and who they are and where they're from. So I'm kind of showing these to kind of give you the flavor. And so when you're reflecting in your blogs, right, you can know who you're talking about a little bit. So let me see if I can find them. And there we go. So instructional systems design. And I'm going to get rid of my, whoops. Oh, I'm going to stop sharing. I thought I was recording, but I didn't. The button is really close, so I'm going to hit the hide video panel. There we go. So now let me go. And so just I'll say that I've been in this field sort of, I minored in it. And I took courses in it at Wisconsin, but Wisconsin's not the best place in the world for instructional designers to get trained. It's more of a neo-Marxist school, social critical theory, but they do teach some applied courses, a couple of them. I took media production my first semester. I took instructional design my first semester, but I wouldn't say that I am an. So by the way, the only place you'll find me in Wikipedia is in instructional design. Yet I don't see myself as an instructional designer, but they like someone liked my blended learning handbook and my models of blended learning. So they put me as an instructional designer for some odd reason, but I'm not, I'll fully admit, I'm not the world's most knowledgeable instructional designer, if you will. But thinking back a few decades ago, oh, did you hear that sound, Christian? You probably didn't, did you? Christian?
No.
No, okay, so I have to reshare and put on my sound. And now we can. And now I can move back. Oh.
Data insufficient.
Did you hear that, Christian?
Got it.
Yeah, so I was an accountant, very bored accountant.
Oh, drat these computers. They're so naughty and so complex.
And that was just at the dawn of the PC age, and we were a high-tech company. We did the most highly dense circuit boards in the world. And I got interested in technology. I got interested in education. I got interested in psychology. I was interested in business. The intersection of those 4 things got me to go back to grad school and leave the cube farms of Milwaukee. And it was a pretty easy decision, actually. As you can see, I didn't like being an accountant.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow? There wasn't one today.
And so off I went, thinking back. I went to grad school, yeah, it's a long, long time ago.
We were on double secret probation, whatever that is.
And that's
We can't afford to have a toga party.
ID from grad
You guys
school.
up for a toga party? Toga! Toga! We were on double secret probation, whatever.
Oh, groovy, baby. Yeah.
Come on, babies, work with me, people. All right.
Oh, groovy, baby. Yeah.
And that's my hair back then, if you can believe
Cool.
that. And so, yeah, I've changed a little bit. That's my daughter and my son, and Alex and Nikki with me. I did have that long of hair during the pandemic, in fact, longer than that. And what was I studying? I was studying psychology, educational psychology. I was going to study artificial intelligence and think about that, but the students from there didn't graduate. So I decided that wasn't a good idea to go into regular psychology and AI. I went to ed psych where you could graduate and so forth. And I minored in ed tech. And thinking back to 2004, I ended up getting a different award on campus. These are my advisors. Two of them, Gary Davis in the middle there next to me and Bob Clausen on the left, taught me creativity and critical thinking. Ron Serlin taught me statistics, and those are my Wisconsin professors. Good people. I just got an email from Gary, a letter from Gary Davis's wife, my advisor. He's got Alzheimer's and been put in to a home, unfortunately. Well, I took instructional design with a guy named Michael Streibel, the smartest man I think I ever met, brilliant guy. He would take all students' papers and take the paperclip or the staple out of everyone and lay out the entire paper on the floor of his office and read them that way. I'm the opposite. I don't think knowledge is connected until you staple it together. But anyways, he taught instructional design. In fact, he picked Charlie Regaluth's book, The Green Book, which Charlie Regaluth was an faculty at IU and IST until a few years ago when he retired. So I read Charlie's Green Book and Yellow Book. He has now volume 3, 4, 5, I don't know, all these green books out there. It's used around the world. People know the Charlie Regaluth's Green Book and Yellow Book. And I read them. But, you know, he talked about constructivist and behavioral models and so forth. And how to promote more of instructor-centered or, you know, student-centered learning environment, and the difference between more objective-centered behaviorist approaches and those that focus on cognitivism or constructivism and what those might entail. And of course, the ADDIE model, you might have heard of. If you hadn't, it's here alive and well: analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. Now, no one knows who developed the ADDIE model, but everyone uses the ADDIE model because it's pretty simplistic and no one can really debate much about it. Everyone does analysis of what we want to teach and who our audience is and who the stakeholders are. And then we design and develop instruction for that, and then evaluate the impacts and effectiveness of. Also in his book was a chapter from Robert Gagne. Now, if you're a teacher, K-12 undergraduate in teaching, I have an undergrad in teaching, you have read from Robert Gagne or heard about him because he's basically created lesson plans. All teachers create lesson plans, and it's, you know, stimulate the, you know, the learners in the classroom, stimulate their prior knowledge, tell them what the objectives are, and then guide their performance and so forth and give them feedback. You start with getting their attention. Well, I'll go through this model in a couple of weeks. But the one chapter in Charlie's book that I found interesting was on Alan Collins' cognitive theory of inquiry. And Alan Collins is still around, still writing books. He's known for being a cognitive psychologist, the spreading of notive activation of learning, if you want to look him up. Very famous guy. He had the one chapter about cognitive theory. When my World is Open book came out, he had a competing book at the exact same time. So my publisher almost didn't publish my World is Open book because he had published one just before that on how schools have to change with this new digital age of learning that we're all in. So with the cognitive theory, you know, of learning, the inquiry-based models, we give more responsibility to the learner, and you know, they're having students in an authentic learning setting, if you will. But really, the most of Charlie's book was about behavioral activity, behavioral psychology. And when I was at West Virginia, Julie Vargas and her husband said that active, engaging learning is when learners click on a keyboard. When they type on a keyboard, that's active and engaging learning. I mean, active engaging learning is not clicking on the keyboard. That's something goes on in your head, you know. So at the time, there's a guy named David Jonasson, pretty famous guy. He almost hired an ISD. We came pretty darn close to it. He went, when I was in grad school, he's at University of Colorado, Denver. I sent him a letter. He actually replied via letter to me, and then went to Penn State, and then went to Missouri. And I kept corresponding with him until he died a decade or so ago. And I got a little recognition in David Jonason's name last year at AECT. He's very, very well known constructivist. And there's big debates at conferences between constructivism and objective learning, behavioral theory, when I was in grad school, all the time. Difference between having reality determined by the learner or determined by the instructional designer, having learning be a constructed thing, having to learn the overall gestalt of something, or having it be more decomposable, machine-like. You shape and ship learners off. It's a factory model versus having a more community-based, apprenticeship-based kinds of model of learning, if you will. So behavioral models, we're emphasizing particular pathways to learning, predetermining what learning outcomes would be, and then teaching for those outcomes. And I kind of partly agree with that, but definitely not fully agree with that. We don't want to always break things down to small bits. Sometimes you have to have proleptic instruction, teaching in anticipation of competence, the big leaps out there that happen all of a sudden. So instructional design is a quandary because we're stuck, deciding whether we want to have small bits of learning happen in the instructional sequence or macro structure. And so Charlie Reguluth has designed the elaboration theory of instruction. And if you get his book, you can read about that. It's kind of moving back and out of a big picture, then small picture, macro, then micro, and so forth. There are other different models, the Addy model, the Dick and Carey model that Cheryl mentioned, typical instructional design models. All these things you'll read about in the readings for this week, next week, and throughout the IST sequence of courses. When you take 521, you'll get all this stuff once again with Dr. Kwan or whoever might be teaching 521 on instructional design. And so if you read Robert Branch's article, he'll talk about what is systemic learning, responsive learning, redundant learning, creative, and all that. So he has these 9 characteristics for instructional design. And then he has the new characteristics. We're moving to an age where we're more student-centered, more goal-oriented, more team-based, more meaningful learning. So he's realized we can no longer rely on traditional forms of learning. We need to move on, as Cheryl said, with a new age of learning. And so you'll read his article where he defines what all these terms are. And I'm not going to read these quotes to you. They're in the slides, and you can read what each one of these principles are. And so I'm just going to skip over them for the sake of time. He then gets into his article, the Dick and Carey model of instruction. You assess the needs of the learners, conduct an instructional analysis of what they need to know, and then write your performance objectives. Develop your assessment instruments, develop your instructional strategy. So it's a linear, mostly model, but it's recursive, and it can come back with each module back to the beginning, with each unit back to the beginning, or parts within the unit. He's designed his own model. It's a variation of the Dick and Carey model, if you will. It's more integrative and more recursive in nature. He'll point out the Addy model in his book. It's a little different pictorial than the Addy model that I previously presented, because they have evaluation in the middle of the Addy model as an ongoing thing that happens throughout each part of the learning process or instructional design process. He'll also talk about David Merrill's pebble in the pond theory of instructional design, where you throw a pebble in the pond, you see all these ripple effects. We start with the task, and the task might impact your evaluation or the learning strategies or the digital technology tools or the interface that might be selected. So we might have task-centered instruction where you design a task, and then the components, presenting the components specific to resolving that task or that problem or that situation, and then demonstrate how an instructor, an expert, someone else might resolve that problem, how they might find a solution to that problem. And then you have another task that you might present to your learners, and you walk people through different task sequences with them. There's another guy named Willis who says that instructional design models are basically kind of like a bucket of all sorts of different theories, whether it's cognitive science and thinking about information processing in the brain, or behavioral models and thinking about objectifying learners as step-by-step, or communications theory. All sorts of things fall in the umbrella of instructional design, which maybe is why so many different people are attracted to the field, because they come from communications theory. They come from psychology, they come from computer science, so they come from English. A lot of our majors come from English, and they're English professors in China, you know, because they can score higher on that GRE because they have good English skills, I think. That's part of it. So, you know, Jerry Willis says there's a lot of things that involve instructional design. You have to have your pre-specified objectives. You have to have your subject matter experts, your SMEs, and you have to have your assessment strategies and all these different things. He says there's a lot of kind of activities that we can engage our learners in, whether it is using case-based reasoning. And by the way, I developed case-based reasoning when I started off for business, in particular Arthur Andersen, which apparently those cases didn't work because of Enron crisis. Arthur Andersen went out of business, and they were not that ethical. I developed ethics cases for Arthur Andersen. Oh, I shouldn't brag about that one. Anyways, project-based learning, authentic forms of learning, online communities-based, you know, learning in a chat community, learning in Canvas community, learning in, you know, Facebook or whatever kind of online, you know, WeChat or whatever. There's all these kind of kitchen sink approaches, learning through an apprenticeship process, learning through, you know, computer supported collaborative learning or project-based learning. So we have all these things out there, all these different areas that have been built over time. There's researchers who just research authentic learning. There's researchers who just research case-based learning. There's researchers who spend their whole life looking at PBL, problem-based learning, or project-based learning, or process-based learning. And instructional design has to take into account all these camps of learning that all think that they're the best. We all have to be PBL. Or, you know, I know some of the faculty here in ISD are editors of the journal PBL. So many faculty are or others believe in inquiry-based learning as the end all and be all. Jerry Willis says, no, it's all these things we should keep in mind when we design our instruction. Issue or top-down objective-based kinds of things, we need to broaden out and think about getting students, the student side of the equation involved. We can't just rely on Dick and Carey anymore. You know, conduct a needs assessment, performance objectives, and job and all this kind of linear kinds of models. We have to think about, you know, who, as Cheryl said, why are we doing this? For what purpose? Why examine the teaching learning process? What benefits can result from applying instructional design? What is the value that's happening here? What are the components of a comprehensive system, if you will? Why examine teaching learning process? All these over and over and over again that is being asked within the different models that are out there. So there's different kind of visuals that kind of compartmentalize or help us to understand the framework of these different models. What level of readiness do we want among our students? What instructional strategies are most appropriate for the objectives? What supports, a big one, what supports are we going to provide within the system? What scaffolds? What technology supports? What other open educational resources, OER, you know, and when are we going to take those supports away? When are we going to wean the learner from the carrots, from the crutches, from the job aids and the task structures, from the tutorials that we've built in? So we're going to have all these job aids and other kinds of things, but ultimately the learner has to do it on their own. We have to walk away from providing all that support for the learners. And so Gary Morrison, who lives in Bloomington now, has designed different models. He has different books about effective instructional design. He was an Old Dominion professor at the University of Memphis and Wayne State before he retired. He grew up in Bedford, Indiana, south of Bloomington. Takes photography here. I had him as a guest in this class. I had this person as a guest, Allison Rossett from San Diego State. She's also retired. She was a guest last year in this class, a year and a half ago. She's a big corporate training kind of person. And so the last thing I'll point out in the slides are quotes of the best quotes from the articles assigned for this week from students who took this class in the past, in 2016 and 17, maybe 18. I put what their favorite quotes were that they remember in this class. So you can read that if you want to. I'm going to stop the recording in a minute here. We stayed a little bit longer, but we're about right. So, so that's kind of an overview of the stuff you're going to read this week. And did I miss anything? We had one suggestion for the future. One was, did I write this down? We had a person that was suggested to bring in. Who was that person? Oh, Bell's going to present on AI. Okay, we can get Bell. What else was suggested that we could do in a future week? Oh, to have people bring in quotes of their favorite article might be a good thing. That would be
And
fun.
also to do a flip class.
A flip class, right? Flip class. We should try a flip class, right? Okay. That's good. Any questions or comments?
I'm glad you're recording because I'm going to have to revisit this.
Yeah, I know I quickly went through those. Normally I would go through that part slowly, but we already had too much time and my brain will be dead and your brain will be dead too. Anything? Any comments? How about we do this? Of what you heard so far, was there anything, strategy or person or model or framework or whatever principle that you resonated with within the last couple hours in here? What's one thing that you maybe can take home with you tonight or this morning in Japan? It's noon now in Japan, isn't it? It's around noontime. 12:30, 12:40.
Yep, about 11:45.
Yeah.
The one thing that I'm going to take with me, because there's a lot of reading this week, and you had mentioned very briefly that if you've seen one instructional design model, you kind of can get on board with all the rest. And that's really motivational when I get through this week's material. And actually listening in this morning, I have so much that I want to sort out and think deeper about. So yeah, it was a lot. I'm glad I was here.
I thought you were going to say it's demotivational to know that one article represents everything.
No. It was like a way that I could start organizing my task ahead of me with the readings and everything. It was a good base, and I would go back through the slides.
All right. Can I ask one thing? Can you play pinochle, sheepset, or 500?
None of the above. Are you talking Wisconsin games?
Yeah,
only
Wisconsin.
cribbage.
Cribbage, okay, good. That's enough. That's a good one. Yeah, okay, cribbage is good.
That gets me by.
All right, that does. Yes. Unless you play my uncle and he gets awfully vicious. But my auntie's a nun. She's kind in playing cribbage, but my uncle not. Jennifer, one thing you got from tonight?
Well, I'm thinking a lot about the relationship between instructional design and the actual practice of teaching, and what I was asking about earlier in terms of creative investment and I guess delivering the course and reacting to actual students. And I'm coming from a K-12 environment where you can go in with plans, but you have to adapt. And then a lot of the energy of the teaching goes into the relationship building, especially now, which was part of what burned me. I had a lot of autonomy, a lot more than some K-12 teachers have. And I was teaching gifted and talented classes. So I did a lot with inquiry-based and project-based and all of that. But then it also can lead to burnout when it's so much. And so if the ID can take some of that on and you can see the forest for the trees and then put more of that energy into the relationship building, I could see that being beneficial. But on the other hand, like what you were saying earlier about being invested in the course that you created. So some of that is lost. So I guess that's what I've been thinking about a lot tonight, but I need to sort out all the models. I've heard of some of them, but I have not. I have some reading to do ahead of me.
Right. And we've brought in David Merrill, who's developed some of the foremost models. I brought him in twice, actually, 2007. And then about 4 years ago at a conference, we did a live session from a conference. He was on with a cane. I think he had hip replacement. So there's a lot of these guys who develop models are getting old, at my point. But read them anyway. They're classics. It's important to know the classics as well as like 2U and how they're combining models, right? So Matt, what did you get from tonight?
Yeah, you mentioned to you, and I was actually, I was surprised, maybe I shouldn't have been, but I've seen over the years, vendors talk about their approaches and models, and my memory serves me, they've always felt a little thin as far as what they're based in. And when I, as we were going through those, and it was backed by the research that I was familiar with, I was actually heartened that there are some groups out there that actually base their work in that research. So,
Right.
you know, as we're thinking about some of the large training endeavors that we're embarking upon, it kind of makes me wonder, like, well, what kind of model are we ending up with, either because of our own intention or just because of the constraints and the other ideas about it that come from the people that we're working with.
Yeah.
And so hopefully it can guide things along, you know, using some of this or parts of these models, or, you know, it's a lot, but I think it's worth the investment of energy in terms of reading and whatnot.
A task could be having everyone in the class commit to a model or build their own model as the final project in here, right? That could be something, and we could do that in 622, the design and learning environments, very easily, but in here too. But I have to ask, can you play the thing that's behind you? And what is it?
Oh, this bass. Yeah, so I was studying it for a couple of years, and then tried to do it in online lessons during the pandemic, and that got really difficult. So this, for the last year, not a whole lot of practice, quite frankly.
Have you been in a band or anything?
No, I haven't. It wasn't. Most of my musical experiences were undergraduate times, but that was a long time ago. So most of my time is spent on guitar.
Undergraduate was done where?
My undergraduate?
Yeah.
It was Whittier College.
Is that Pennsylvania, or where is that?
No, that's in LA County.
Okay.
California. Yeah.
So Amelia, did you go to UW Oshkosh, or where did you get your undergraduate?
University of Minnesota, East Asian Studies.
Right, you told me, yeah. Minnesota.
Yeah, so that's why I ended up here. Yep.
Yeah. So they have reciprocity with Wisconsin, so people in Wisconsin can go to Minnesota at the same price. It's a good place. My niece went there. It's one of the best campuses in the world. It's a lovely place, lovely city, highest literacy in the country, other than maybe Seattle or someplace in Iowa somewhere. But people read a lot there. This is so cold, they have to. Jennifer,
Right.
where'd you get your undergraduate?
Texas A&M University, and then I went back and got another undergraduate degree at UT, and that's the one that actually took me through my teaching career. So
Right.
I'm a little indecisive to start out, and now I'm finally making my way back for master's.
Okay, hook 'em horns. Okay, Christian, you're the final comment for tonight. Anything you want to say?
It will seem like, as you're getting into the field of ed tech, instructional design, whatever you're going to end up coming up with as the term you call it, it will seem like it's unfocused and out of control, that there's no cohesion, and that all of these theories cause it to be all over the place, and in that it feels like it loses its validity. But it's not. They're like really cool tools in a toolbox that allow you to pull it out when you need it. And as you like, you almost have to let them wash over you a little bit and not get too caught up in them to be able to absorb them in a way that you can use them. Because otherwise, if you get too caught up, it's like you can't use any of them because they all start to get too fuzzy.
Where's your undergraduate? Butler, U of Indy, in IU?
It's University of Indianapolis.
Yeah, yeah, U of Indy. You know, and so if you're interested in applying more, my course on 546 on instructional strategies for critical thinking, creative thinking, cooperative learning, you know, like you SWOT model, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, that we cover more of the specifics, you know, in the trenches. These models are a step up, kind of the overall process to get it to what you actually do. You have to, you know, think, you know, down a level. I want to thank everyone for coming to part 2 as well as part 1 tonight. And next week we have Yua Ma and Natalie, who will be talking to us about what's happening at Baylor University. They're both students currently in the program, one at the doctoral level, one at the master's level. So it should be informative. And I've known Yua since she was a beginning master's student 12 years ago. So I know she has prepared a lot probably for us. Again, we'll see you next time. And next week, I'll see you online and email and in your blogs. I'll stop the recording. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.